The Cold War, an economic analysis of the US-Soviet Union conflict, presented by Emily Valdez. In this video, I hope to explain how decades of tension and military buildup shaped global economies, trade, innovation, and still influence markets today. How the Cold War shaped modern economies. While the Cold War is often remembered for political tension and military standoffs, it also had profound economic consequences that shaped the modern world. Here we will outline the key areas we'll explore. The rise of the military-industrial complex. The US and USSR both built strong ties between government defense industries, driving innovation and creating lasting economic influence. Massive government spending and its effect on the GDP. Huge defense budgets boosted growth in the US, while the USSR's spending often came at the expense of consumer goods. Space race economics. Competition in space led to major investments in science and technology, with benefits beyond military applications. The economic collapse of the USSR. The USSR prioritized heavy industry and defense, creating a very different economic path from the West. The shift to neoliberal policies in the West as a response. Many Western nations adopted deregulation and privatization, shaping modern economic policy. Next, we'll look at each of these areas in more detail and discuss how the Cold War left a lasting mark on global economies. What was the Cold War? After the devastation of World War II, the world was fractured, and two superpowers rose from the ruins with competing visions for the future. The United States championed capitalism, market-driven democracies, while the Soviet Union sought to expand a communist, state-controlled model. What emerged was a tense and quiet struggle that touched every corner of the globe, shaping governments, economies, and alliances without ever erupting into a direct battle. Nations everywhere felt the pressure, adjusting trade, aid, and military strategies to navigate the demands of these powerful rivals. Europe, Asia, Latin America, and Africa became arenas where ideology and influence collided, even as local leaders tried to maintain stability. In the end, the Cold War was not just a contest of armies or weapons, but a battle of ideas that reshaped economies and institutions around the world. Following World War II, the USSR and much of Europe were completely devastated, with cities, factories, and infrastructure in ruins. The United States, largely unscathed, worked to stabilize the global economy and prevent political instability by creating the United Nations, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and NATO. The Marshall Plan directed billions into rebuilding Western Europe, boosting GDP, consumption, and trade networks. The Soviet Union, meanwhile, focused on rebuilding heavy industry, transportation, and energy at home, while supporting aligned governments and communist movements abroad. These investments show the USSR's allocation of scarce resources between domestic production and international influence, shaping both its GDP composition and its role in the global economy under competition with capitalist powers. The arms race. In 1949, the Soviet Union tested its first nuclear bomb, a major shift in the global balance of power. This was partly a response to US nuclear capabilities and the expansion of NATO. In turn, President Dwight D. Eisenhower authorized development of the hydrogen bomb, escalating the arms race. Both superpowers dedicated enormous resources to nuclear weapons, conventional forces, and associated research. In economic terms, this meant large portions of the GDP and labor were directed toward defense production, creating industrial growth in some sectors while constraining others. Factories, engineers, and materials were channeled into military projects, influencing industrial policy and technological development. These investments also had strategic signaling effects. Nuclear tests and weapon production weren't just military tools, they were public demonstrations of economic and industrial capacity. The arms race shows how geopolitics and security concerns directly shaped national economic priorities. Next, we'll talk about the military-industrial complex. In his 1961 farewell address, President Eisenhower warned about the rise of the military-industrial complex, a term he coined meaning a permanent partnership between the U.S. government and defense contractors. This relationship ensured that a significant portion of GDP and industrial production was forever tied to national defense. Major companies like Lockheed, Boeing, and Raytheon became central players in producing military hardware, while research and development efforts spurred technological innovation. This system created jobs and advanced technology, but it also made the economy heavily dependent on federal defense spending, locking resources into the military sector at the expense of other areas. Cold War priorities formed the future mold for industrial allocation, labor markets, and overall GDP composition of the United States that we still see today. Space race economics. The space race became one of the most dramatic fronts of the Cold War. The USSR took the lead early with Sputnik in 1957 and the first human spaceflight in 1961. These milestones weren't just scientific, they signaled large Soviet advancements in rocketry that could also have military implications, which pushed the United States into a massive technological sprint of its own. The US expanded NASA, funded universities, and built entire new high-tech industries around computing, aerospace, and materials research. That wave of investments eventually produced Apollo 11 in 1969 when the US landed on the moon, an achievement shaped just as much by economics as by science. The USSR continued devoting huge resources to programs like Luna and Soyuz, reflecting how both countries were channeling national wealth into prestige, security, and technological competition rather than everyday consumer needs. The space race shows how fear and rivalry can reshape economies just as powerfully as war itself. Proxy wars and global spending. The Cold War also involved other proxy wars such as Korea, Vietnam, and Afghanistan, as the United States and the Soviet Union competed for influence around the globe. The US, motivated by fear of expanding communist power, engaged in military support, foreign aid, and strategic interventions in countries across Asia, Latin America, and beyond. Some of these interventions included direct support for allied governments and covert actions, such as CIA-backed coups and the Cuban Missile Crisis, shaping both political and economic outcomes abroad. These global interventions, particularly the Vietnam War, had domestic economic consequences. Massive defense spending contributed to inflation and put pressure on the US dollar, which was pegged to gold at $35 per ounce under the Bretton Woods system. By 1971, these economic pressures led the US to abandon the gold peg, effectively ending the Bretton Woods framework and reshaping the global monetary system. Global monetary systems shift. Global trade in this era was also defined by the war. Following the Bretton Woods collapse, ending the fixed exchange rate system, and allowing currencies to float, The global monetary system was more flexible but also more volatile. The 1970s brought further economic shocks. Oil price spikes in 1973 and 1979, combined with rising domestic spending from the Vietnam War and other Cold War interventions, led to stagflation, a mix of high inflation and stagnant economic growth in the US. These conditions rippled across global markets, increasing volatility further. Next, we're going to take a look at economic life in the USSR. Life in the Soviet Union was shaped by decades of economic pressure to compete against global neoliberal forces. To maintain power, prioritization was heavily placed on industry and military output at the expense of consumer goods and services within the bloc. This focus led to scarcity in housing, food, and household products, affecting daily life across the country. Technological innovation, while strong in specific sectors like space and defense, generally lagged behind the West in consumer-oriented industries. By the 1980s, GDP growth had slowed sharply, reflecting both structural inefficiencies and the economic strain of ongoing Cold War military and foreign commitments. Decisions made by their command economy were reflecting rapid industrial and military development at the cost of its citizens' living standards and access to essential goods. The fall of the Soviet Union. In the early 1980s, falling global oil prices hit hard. The USSR relied heavily on energy exports to fund its budget, so this drop removed one of its most reliable sources of foreign currency. Combined with the ongoing strain of the arms race and competition with the US, state revenue became increasingly tight. When Mikhail Gorbachev came into power in 1985, he introduced reforms to revive the system. But these changes, market-style decentralization, greater openness, and reduced political control disrupted long-standing institutional structures faster than the economy could adapt. Rather than stabilizing the system, they unintentionally accelerated political fragmentation and exposed underlying economic weaknesses. Moving from a command economy to a market economy happened abruptly, causing unemployment, inflation, and widespread hardship across the former republics. In December 1991, Gorbachev resigned and terminated the existence of the Soviet Union, marking the end of both the USSR and the Cold War era it had defined. The long-term legacy of the Cold War. The Cold War ended on paper, but the world it engineered kept moving. The trade blocs, security alliances, and economic institutions built in those decades became the scaffolding of the modern global order. In the West, the shift towards deregulation and market-driven policy rewired how economies grew, while in the United States, the defense sector that ballooned during the Cold War settled into the structure of the economy itself, an engine of contracts, jobs, and innovation that never really powered down. Its echoes are everywhere. US-China rivalry carries the same strategic pulse, only now the battleground is technology, supply chains, and computational power. The war in Ukraine has pushed nations back into high defense spending, and the race for AI, advanced chips, and new space capabilities feels like an updated version of the old competition for scientific prestige. Even Russia moves through an economic landscape shaped by Soviet industrial bones, energy, metals, and the state. The Cold War closed, but the architecture it left behind is still holding up the world we live in today.